Kia ora and welcome to another Aotearoa Rugby Pod big show for you today. Got a really important guest, Mick Byrne. You've probably heard of him as All Blacks assistant coach, you might not have, but here's a guy who's one of the great innovators in our game. From an Aussie rules background, comes into rugby and changes a whole bunch of stuff across the world in Leinster, then with the All Blacks in Australia. He is now the head coach of the Fijian Drua, so we'll be having a chat with him about skills, about rugby, about how the Drua are going. Plenty to talk to with Mick Byrne. Remember, he's a guy who coached Dan Carter how to pass and Richie McCaw how to tackle. So he's a guy who knows a few things about a few things. We'll talk with him. The Chiefs, the loss there. What does that mean? The loss to the Reds. We'll get into a bit of that. Are the Brumbies now and with a chance of being top qualifier? The Crusaders shut down the Blues, a bit of analysis on that. And what about Leicester firing Anuku? Man, him and Caleb Clark, I think Caleb didn't come out on top of that, Chipper.
No, I don't think he would feel he did either. Leicester was, immense. And Caleb still had his moments, but I suppose the kick out of the full in the second half was probably one he'd like to take back.
Totally. James Parsons, by the way. Former All Blacks hooker. So, Chipper, before we get on to Mick Byrne in a few minutes' time, let's get into some of the rugby on the weekend, most notably the Chiefs versus the Reds. Obviously, we know that a lot of top players were arrested. Retallick, Kane, Weber, Taukei'aho, lots of top players were arrested. But you've got to give some credit to the Reds' defence. They were very staunch. Yeah,
especially, I suppose, towards the end there, when they did give away advantages. And I was surprised that the Chiefs probably didn't take the advantage rather than trying to push, because he had shown all night that the advantage wasn't going to last forever, whether it was a penalty or knock-on, so it was always going to end if they kept going. And I felt like they were starting to get the momentum back and should have backed themselves probably in Golden Point, but wasn't to be. And I don't think it's a bad thing. This is going to sound ridiculous to most people, probably to Chiefs fans, is sometimes this will just sharpen the focus at a really important time of the year. It'd been going all perfectly. And we've seen teams in the past, they go on these big win streaks and then they, drop the final or a semi-final or whatever. So I think this will be great for that next tier of player that got opportunities, and also just for the guys that probably, as Roger Randall said at half-time, tried to play the game on their own. So I don't think it's all bad, and I think it's great for the comp, because it puts the Reds right back in the mixer now for finals footy.
I think you're talking about the held up right at the end, aren't you? About how they had a couple of advantages and really they had the chance. So let's say that you're the captain and you're on the field and that advantage is happening and you got the chance to get over the line like Thompson did. As a captain, how do you go and make the call, hey guys, let's take the advantage?
Oh, I think you've got to trust your game drivers. So it wouldn't be, but I mean, previous times or experience you hear captains yell out, just knock it on, or to take the three. But the Chiefs just aren't that side. They've won games by doing what they did. So it's not surprising they did it. I'm just thinking if they're ever in that situation again, Damien's been pretty accurate off the tee, and I would back them against most teams to go deep into that sort of Golden Point.
So should Chiefs fans be worried about this glitch?
I personally, if I was a Chiefs fan, I'd be thinking it's a great timing. You'd rather them have this, slip up by giving guys opportunity that haven't had as many runs on the clock, but also you don't want to do this against the Hurricanes, coming up or the Brumbies, because there's a psychological aspect to it. Maybe the only downside to the loss is they potentially could have sent another team to have that pressure and opportunity in Canberra, but I think they're going to have to send the two big dog squads for the next 2 weeks in particular.
Oh, well, that's it. They've got to run home against the Hurricanes, the Brumbies away and the Force away. So it's actually not an easy run home. And while they've got a buffer of 5 points at the top of the table, there's a good chance that could come back.
Yeah, well, I think if they win this weekend and get the result, they can send guys to Perth, other squad members that potentially aren't on tour. So they are still a little bit in control of how they go into that final series. But it's now they need to win, not they can have that one loss maybe against the Brumbies in Canberra.
Dude, the YouTube comments section lit up something terrible, didn't it? We didn't give the Chiefs enough love last week.
Yeah.
We've been giving them love for 10 weeks, then they slip up, and here we are again talking about them.
Well, it was hard. It's
Apologies.
hard. I feel that, for Chiefs fans, maybe we didn't last week, but there's not much more you could say. They had their blueprint and they were just running red hot.
Yeah, absolutely. Red hot, Samipeni Finau. Now, we talked about him a little earlier in the year as a possible bolter, as a 6. That game on the weekend was mighty impressive. Also, the fact that he went off injured and came back on and showed guts.
Yeah, he's definitely got tick out. I think he's shown that the whole time he's sort of been in this Chiefs squad. But he's getting more and more confident, I think, especially around his set-piece roles, which are critical. But his work rate, his work ethic, similar to Tupou Vaa'i as well, like the stats, 20 carries. If you actually look into those 20 carries, a lot of them are the tough carries. Where there's a wall of defenders, no one, wants to run into it, and he ducks his head and gets into it. Big work rate on defence. But also disciplined. He's not trying to make a name for himself. He has to hold that edge, so he doesn't hit a lot of breakdown rucks, but he holds that edge with that discipline because that's their system and structures. So often, when guys hit form like he has this season, maybe break that to get a little bit more action, but he's stood strong on that right flank all year. I think another one is your boy Luke Jacobson. I thought he impressed at 7. Depending how Ethan comes back, he is a genuine 6, 7, 8. And option for the All Blacks to look at maybe before naming the World Cup squad. But we know it goes from 36 to 33, and I know 3 players sounds like not a lot, but when you've got to carry 3 hookers and 3 halfbacks, it makes the jigsaw a little bit harder. So players that can do those multi-roles, and he had a big work rate, 11 carries, 13 tackles and 42 rucks. Big shift.
Yeah. Samipeni, is it too late, do you think, or do you think there's still time? They're willing to trial a new person?
I think so, but maybe early. I'm not too sure, but you can't ignore form. And I think Jace Ryan, he would like the size of his body and how he could probably get his hands on and even make him a better player. I suppose the only obstacle is there's some 6s starting to play really well, and one guy that's just doing sort of loose forward numbers is Scott Barrett. I know he's playing at lock, but man, the work he's getting through at the moment. So he's putting a genuine hand up. And I keep mentioning it because I think against those Northern Hemisphere sides, if you think a Retallick, a Whitelock and a Barrett in your liner and your scrum and the ability to work around the field, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, half of you's got to be concerned that it's World Cup year and there isn't a settled 6. The other half of you thinks, wow, there's some options.
Yeah, I just think the way he's playing, if you watch the way he's playing, it's not too dissimilar to a 6. He's got that ability. And I don't think he goes to 6 and changes his style.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? He doesn't need to. He just needs to continue doing what he's doing.
Yeah. And look, the Brumbies, they beat the Highlanders 48-32. They are right up there now. They're ahead of the Hurricanes by 4 points and 5 points behind the Chiefs. This run home could be interesting because of the Brumbies. We've been talking a lot all year about all these other teams, but that the Brumbies are in the mix. The Brumbies could be in the mix. In fact, the Brumbies could qualify top. Yeah,
they could. They're not in control of it themselves because they probably need the Chiefs to lose to the Hurricanes. But I think to give them confidence, no matter who plays for the Chiefs, getting that win at home will be crucial for them to actually, I think, send a message to the comp that they will be there at the pointy end.
But they do, and I don't know who made this draw. Because whoever made the draw, you're a genius, has got the Chiefs and the Brumbies playing with 2 weeks to go, and it's in Canberra. And that is a hell of a game for the setup of this competition. Yeah,
and you have to think they'll win against the Force and the Rebels, but that'll be a juicy number.
Yeah, that'll be an absolute pillar.
Especially, if the Chiefs don't get over the Hurricanes this weekend, it will be all on.
Speaking of an absolute perler, that Crusaders Blues game, despite the fact that Blues didn't score any tries, was an absolute belter of a game for its intensity and what was left out on the field. The Blues went down there having won last season in Christchurch. This year, they barely got into the 22.
Yeah, well, they didn't have a lot of ball. The first 30 minutes was some of the best footy I've watched in a long time, like a defensive side just turning up time and time again, and a Crusaders side that just said, we want to keep taking it to you, not taking 3, going to the corner. Both sides had a high turnover rate, but the Blues had 20 turnovers, with 41% possession. They'll even admit that was probably too high, but they were still within a sniff. And I think we know once that card hit, we all knew it was going to get upgraded to 20 minutes. That just, even though they held them out, that defence just sucked a lot of life out of, I suppose, the energy. And you've got to give credit, the Crusaders made some adjustments. Like the Blues definitely, when they played at Eden Park, if you look at that game earlier, a lot of the time Sevu Reece was quite high defensively, trying to really shut off, and that's where that kick space was they were trying to get to. But man, it was almost like they knew it was coming. I know Richie's come out and said, he listened to comments from Caleb, but they were already sort of planning. They probably reviewed themselves and said, geez, we're giving away too much kick space. And the Blues are known for that kick strategy and those attacking kicks or up and unders, especially Bodie. And, they picked it off really, really well. They just didn't let them get into that game. And maybe, like Leon said, maybe they could have, not kicked as much. But he said even in the key areas, like your set piece and the breakdown, they probably came second there more often than not. I think early on they were probably doing really well in that breakdown, but as he said, they probably just wore away.
It certainly didn't feel like it was the amount of kicking. It felt like it was the quality of the kicking. It wasn't up to its usual standard.
I think it was. Sometimes it's the amount as well. Like because they were defending for such long periods, to just give the ball back and go back onto defence was sometimes you've got to temper that, game plan versus, how are the troops going, So, I don't know, it still was a great game. I don't know how, and I will say it, that knock-on was missed. It would have, Dalton was trying to ask the ref, but everyone will say I'm just got my patch on, which I don't, because I don't think it would have changed the outcome. Yeah. But that bonus point, I think, could be crucial coming into the back end. But, you win some, you lose some.
I don't think it was your fault. That was an obvious knock-on, and anyone who was watching the game could see it was an obvious knock-on, and the referee wasn't keen on reviewing that. But it was very obvious that was a very bad decision. And impossible, it's hard to understand how no one saw it. It was an open play, and it went a long way forward.
Massive way forward. And, credit to the Crusaders, though. So often you'd stop. They are ruthless in their approach. They play, the old adage, play to the whistle, and they did that. So did the Blues defensively, but you've already touched on Leicester. Man, he's in some form. He's certainly, I would say, the form left winger at the moment in the country.
Doing everything.
Yeah, defensively, in the air, still scoring the tries as we expect, but it's the little work he's doing off the ball, really. Looking in, around the ruck for carries, coming out the back, sort of that Corumbeti style, that we credit, so positively with the Wallabies and, even with the Wild Knights when he plays over there. So, he looks like a man very, very hungry, and I know he's come out and talked about a number of offers from all and sundry, so it's a good time for him to be playing well.
He seems to have a roving commission too. He's on the right wing, he's on the left wing, he's all over the place.
That's what I mean, but I think he's seeing things and putting himself there to make a difference. And he does attract defenders, which then creates opportunity for the guys like Jordan and co to have a little bit more time with the ball in hand.
How a big guy like that gets vertical too is mind-blowing.
Oh, power. It's Caleb's the same. It's just so much power in those glutes. They just spring like they're on a trampoline. Yeah. Our
next guest has got a long, distinguished career as a coach in rugby for over 20 years as one of the top skills coaches in the world, and now as the head coach at the Drua, Mick Byrne. Been at Leicester, Scotland, New Zealand, the Blues, Australia. He's been a skill coach to some of the greatest players of all time, Chip.
Yeah, and made them a hell of a lot better. The one thing I love about Mick is his attention to detail, but they always say the best coaches are natural teachers. And I think no matter the personality he comes across, he has the ability to instill that growth in their game no matter what. So it's a real privilege that he's here with us today.
Excellent. Mick, come on in. Thank you very much for joining us. Was Chip an easy one to coach?
Yeah, well, when you work as hard as he does and prepared to work, we'll just sort of cross compliments to each other here. But, Jipper was, just continually looking to get better. And they're the sort of players you really enjoy coaching, the guys that are really passionate about getting better. And yeah, he was certainly up there with the best of them.
And I suppose that's what a person, you're a head coach, but as a skills coach, that's basically what it's all about.
Oh, no question. I think everybody, I mean, I've always used the analogy of golfers, like I'm sure Dustin Johnson and these guys are out there getting better every day. They've got their swing coach, they've got their putting coach, and they're the best in the world, but they're still trying to get better. And any person that chooses professional sport as a career obviously is passionate about getting better. And my role was always to find out how I can help them do that.
And that was a natural thing for you when you headed into coaching, that was kind of your passion?
Yeah, I think when I grew up playing rugby and rugby league, and that was always something that I'd been coached into as a kid. So I knew all about that game. And then late in my school years, my last year of school, I switched over to Australian rules, and suddenly I had to learn a whole different skill set. And along the way, there was different things that came to me to teach me how to do stuff. And I think the things that I found the most helpful were coaches that asked me to try and get better and teach me a few things that could help me get better and try a few different things. So I found that to be, not only good for me, but, as soon as I went coaching, I was like, well, this is how I learned to do things, good people teaching me how to do things. And it wasn't about what. No one ever talked about the what. It was always the how. That's how I learned when I was young. So I thought, well, as a coach, I'm going to teach players the how. To do that, I had to obviously learn it myself, but it's not sort of why we do things or what you're doing, it's how you do it. And that's why, for me as a coach, that was always my philosophy.
Just a bit of a backgrounder, Mick did pretty well. He did pretty bloody well as an AFL player to 167 games for Melbourne, Hawthorn and Sydney, won a premiership with Hawthorn, 3 goals in the grand final, Mick. I don't really know what that means, but is that good? That's good?
Yeah. Oh, look, any goal in the grand final is good. It's like, it's probably worth a try or so, so it was good. Yeah, I think being able to get on the scoreboard in the last game of the year is always a good thing.
So having done that and then going back into rugby league at Manly and then into rugby coaching, what was the decision to head back from AFL in the direction of, I suppose, your first childhood loves with the oval ball?
Yeah, it probably came about by accident. I moved back to Sydney, finished with the Swans and started coaching there. But because I'd grown up in Sydney, some of my mates were still, and when I moved back to the Swans, I bucked the system and went over and lived on the northern beaches where I grew up, whereas most of the Swans players were living in the eastern suburbs or down Cronulla. So I went back to where my roots were in Manly, and all my mates were still either involved playing or coaching at Manly Rugby League, and just asked if I could pop down and help them with a bit of their kicking and catching. And I did that, and I found, the coach and the coaching coordinator came to me and offered me an opportunity to do 1 day a week there. So I started coaching there, but at the same time I was coaching in the AFL. And I guess it wasn't until I got an opportunity to go into rugby that the global game became available to me. And that happened at Manly Rugby. And from there, the head coach there was Tim Lane, who was the Wallabies backs coach, and he asked me to come in and do the Wallabies in '98. So I went in there, and then suddenly I just found myself sort of working my way through the rugby world.
It's a bloody good story.
It certainly is. I suppose one of your strengths, Mick, is you're almost ahead of the curve in a way. How do you continue to do that as the game is evolving pretty much year to year at the moment?
Yeah, well, I think when I started in the game, I was probably the only skills coach in the world at the time, and I was encompassing a lot of areas. So there was like specialist coaches had been in, there was defence coaches had come in from rugby league, there was 1 or 2 guys doing a bit of kicking coaching, but I'd sort of cut my teeth in the game of league and union. So, and being at Manly Rugby League for nearly 10 years as a sort of a consulting coach, I'd done a lot of work in the different aspects of the game. So I could see that the game, I understood the game, but what I didn't understand when I came back to rugby was why they kicked like they kicked. I couldn't understand it, because when I was sort of looking at it, I'm like, well, you can kick on any tackle you like. When I came in from rugby league, it was like, well, you try and run your first 4 or 5 plays, you kick on your 5th tackle and it all set up. But in rugby, you can kick from the first tackle. So, and there's all this space on the field that defence coaches back when I started were like, they had these tight defences that rush up and put pressure on you, but there's all this space around, and I couldn't really understand why. And so when I came into the game, I'm like, well, why can't we utilise this space? Oh, that's not what we do. Well, why don't we do it? Oh, it's just not what we do. Well, and I think the key was then, if they're going to do it, we've got to get good at it. We've got to upskill our players to not only kick but catch. And I think if we're going to give away possession by kicking the ball, when I was there, it was just basically under pressure, kick the ball back to them, get out of our territory, take pressure off us down here, kick it to them and defend, versus let's kick to score. So basically when I started with the All Blacks, my presentation to Graham Henry and Wayne Smith was, we want to bring a kicking game in where it helps us score more tries by hand. And so that's where it started. So we're saying, well, how do we do that? Well, we use a kicking game to manipulate defences. Obviously, we'd like to score, but if we can manipulate defences and set some of our great players alight, that was going to be part of it as well.
You'd have to say, I mean, to stick with kicking, obviously with the Fijian Drua, probably not their natural skill set is to kick the ball away. They've obviously played, I suppose, touch rugby growing up and the ability to offload and keep that ball alive. What are some of the, I suppose, the nuances of coaching in Fiji and, you know, I suppose a different style or ways they approach the game? How has that sort of challenged you? And I suppose over the 2 years, how have maybe you potentially changed to get the best out of them, especially this season?
Yeah, it's a good question, Jip. I think, you know, like it's not a natural part of their game, and a lot of players aren't great at it. I mean, if you think back to Rox and City when we started with them, you know, it wasn't something they did naturally, but it's just a skill that they can learn, and you know, they became good at it, and it's another dimension to their game. And if we can upskill these players, it just adds another dimension. But it's not something that they do. And I've always believed, you know, people talk about decision making and skills. What's more important? Well, obviously I'm biased, but I think skills comes first, because if you don't have a skill, you're actually not looking for the opportunity to use it. If you don't have it, you're not looking to use it. So if you can't pass with your left hand, you're not looking for that space outside your right shoulder that might be a good left-hand pass if you can't do that. Likewise, if you're kicking, if you can't kick, you're not looking for the space in behind the line. So the first thing we have to do is upskill our players to give them the skill sets. And then once we give them that, then they can start making good decisions, because they can then execute a skill to back up that decision. And so we're at that point at the moment where we're just upskilling our players. You know, we're working hard with our players on their kicking game. We've scored a couple of good tries with little dinks in behind, little chips over the top. We're starting to add that. And if you can do that and you've got a threatening running team, and if you can add that little bit of kicking game to it, you become, you know, what we've always called a triple threat. So you become a three-dimensional team. You can either run, pass or kick. We're still working on that kicking aspect, but it'll be exciting when we get to where we need to get to with it.
If you look at the games you've done extremely well in this year, your kick stats have probably been a little bit higher, probably 15 or over, not like, I mean, New Zealand Aussie teams can get up to that 30. I don't think it's up to that level yet, but I think that game management and that balance has been so crucial coming out of your half. I mean, a lot of the times in the games you've won, you've had 1, 2 or 3 rucks in your own 22, and outside of that, you've put the ball in behind and almost been patient in the sense to let the opposition make the mistakes, and then you know that once you're in your 50, you can take I suppose, the wind out of their sails and puff more in yours.
Yeah, sounds like you've been in our review meetings. So I think that's one of the key things for us, is to help our players understand that clinical nature of that game and that part of the field. I mean, last year we were just too excitable about getting the ball and trying to play there. And Super Rugby teams, especially the good teams, are going to really put pressure on you in that part of the field, because I know they've got 80 metres behind them to pick up any little line break, and their scramble D is excellent. So we have learnt to do that. We still get caught out every now and then. They're getting a bit excited in that area and looking to maybe overplay our hand, but we're certainly better this year. And you're right, the games we have gone well, we've probably executed that back end of the field a lot better.
How long does it take to embed those ideals? Like when do you see that being an end game when that works perfectly as you'd like it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think if you start with a group of players that have played that sort of football, so if you're dealing with a group of, Kiwi kids or Aussie kids that have grown up playing it through their schoolboy rugby and they've got that sort of ingrained clinical nature to their game, it doesn't take long at all. It probably takes you a season to embed what you really want to get out. But when you're actually trying to change cognitive behaviour, which is, another way of saying instinct, when you go down and watch these guys play, and I go now, when I got back to Fiji, I went around and had a look at how they play down at the park and how they play on the beach, and they play no-touch rugby. So it's just frenetic. You get touched, it's a turnover. So this is the way they've played all their life. And so when you go back there and realise you're actually now saying to someone, take contact, clean the ball out, get another one, take another set of contact, get back, let's clear it out of here, give the ball back to them. That's not the way they've played all their life. All they've ever done in their life is try to give it to a teammate who may not necessarily be in a better position, but they can't get touch with it. So they just throw it and they just throw it and they just throw it. And when you try to embed that sort of behaviour, it takes a little bit longer. But again, it comes back to probably how we open the show. If the players are prepared to do the work as a coach, it's a lot easier to work with that. And I've got to say, our players are really professional in that. They really want to get it right. And that's probably why in our second year, we've been able to make that progress, because the players are working extremely hard on that aspect of their game.
If we look, and I know you won't want to single anyone out, but if we use, I suppose, Frank Lamani as an example, I remember when you guys were playing the Brumbies last season in Canberra. It was quite hot, afternoon game. You defended for a long period of time in your own 22, and then you eventually got the breakdown turnover, and Frank Lamani takes the quick tap right under his sticks. The forward pack's probably gas because they've defended a number of phases, and then he gets turned over and the Brumbies eventually score from that turnover, versus Frank Lamani this year, who's manipulating defences, making great decisions when to use the quick tap and when to just settle things down. I mean, his growth in a year in this side, from the outside looking in, he has been exceptional.
You're right, mate, and I think, we've had a chat about that, and I know, none of us like singling out players, but if you're going to talk about that one, I mean, I've had some good chats to him about that. And, I think this year he's realising, as a great player, in a Fijian team, that everyone else is working hard as well. And he doesn't have to do it off his own bat anymore. Like he's there, he's got 14 mates out on the field that'll come and help him and do his stuff. And he's taking probably a lot of patience now, because he knows that the game's going to get played and will exit, and then he gets his chance. And also understanding, chatting to Frank about it and all our players, understanding that the way the game is played these days, we only ever play 60% of the game the way we train for, and the other 40% is making stuff up as we go, because it's our line out, or it might be an opposition line out, it's overthrown, and suddenly our hooker at the back of the line out's got the ball and going into contact on his own. We haven't practiced that. So what are we going to do for those next couple of phases? We just play. And that's the time to just play, because their defence is not set. They're not folding around the corner because they weren't prepared for that. If they thought they were on attack. So we get probably 2, maybe three rucks if we can get a bit of a line break where we can just play. That's the time to play our style. That's the time to play the game that we play. If it's our line out and we win it, that's not the time to start throwing stuff around and because the defence is set. They're going to come around the corner, they're going to gang up on us, and they'll be right. But so we're just learning how to really control that 60% of the game, and then the other 40%, mate. I would not even try and tell our boys how to play that 40%. Just let them go. They cut their teeth on that as kids. So when that ball gets turned over, boys, you just play. Probably the thing that we've got to get better at is, because we are so excitable when we do get that turnover, is to hang on to it for maybe 1 or 2 rucks, to set it up and go from there, rather than trying to score off that turnover.
I suppose a big part of the enjoyment of the game, you don't want to take that away. You've got to allow that freedom, you've got to allow that essence of Fijian rugby to go. If you over-structured it, you'd run into issues.
Yeah, and that's the key. I think for me, last year was probably trying to get some structure into them. And it was frustrating when we didn't get it. But when you watch them play, there's stuff that they do that, you wouldn't want them to stop doing. But I think you alluded to it before with the story about our turnover under our posts. Where are we doing it and when are we doing it? We get better at that. We'll be able to marry the two parts of the game together.
There must be some freakish things you see at training that you must just blow your mind, and as a skills coach particularly, just really enjoy.
Yeah, every day there's something going on. I think the thing that's probably blown my mind the most is the physical nature of the way they hit each other at training. And, for me being a pakeha, like at the end of the day, if someone hit me like that at training, I probably want to get up and pop him on the nose, but they get up and pat each other on the back. It's a great hit. That's just what they expect. So I think that's probably been the biggest eye-opener. There's no such thing as 60% or shoulders on. We just go at it. And, they respect each other for getting hit, and that's something. But certainly from a skills perspective, there's some things you'll do and they'll just go end to end on a try, and you're just like, well, that's just something special there. And we've seen a bit of it. I think probably the disappointing thing for me was the try we scored against the Blues that was called back on a forward pass. And we got the apology on Monday saying, look, sorry, it wasn't a forward pass. We'll be better than that next time. But that was the try of the year for me. That try we scored there. And that's the tries we can score. But, and then you sort of get the apology on the Monday from the refs saying, look, sorry, we got the call wrong. It wasn't a forward pass, which has probably robbed the team of the try of the year. But when you see that sort of stuff, you see that quite a lot at training, and you're just like, wow, how'd they do that?
If we look at the Waratahs, rather than sort of reviewing, they had a lot of success against the Rebels with the driving maul. Probably an area of the force maybe had some success against you guys. What's that sort of mindset, or what are you looking to adjust leading into this week?
Yeah, well, it's one of those technical parts of the game. I'm not sure how many of our boys do mauls on the beach when they're playing footy as they're growing up, I don't think it's a part of the game that they've cut their teeth on. They're learning, they're understanding it more. Greg Fleming's doing a great work with the forward pack and getting them there. But I think the key there is the ability to switch on to it early. And, like I read Smithy's comments about it the other day, and, I can sort of see where Smithy's coming from. But at the same time, working with our forwards coaches and our forwards, there is a real art to it. The challenge probably is working and making sure. And I think the refs have been a little bit better over the last few weeks at just not allowing the illegal setup. But once the maul gets set up, it's very hard to stop. And so some of our guys are they're just learning how to actually hit it earlier and how to get in there earlier and be technically better at the start.
Just for our viewers, Mick, how can a viewer tell the difference between an illegal setup and a legal setup when it comes to that driving line-out drive?
I think one of the easiest things is if the only player that should have his back to the try line he's trying to go to is the player that catches the ball. Everyone else should be facing the try line. What ends up happening is one of the lifters ends up turning his back to the try line as well. So now you've got two guys that are at the front of the maul, and the ball's being protected by two guys. So I think the refs are getting better at that. There's some teams are really good at getting that lifter in front of the catcher. But I think just if you're looking and seeing, if you see a lifter in front of the catcher when they land, that's illegal. And that just stops you being able to get at the ball. That's the challenge. If you're defending it, you want to be able to get in and disrupt that flow of that maul. But if the ball gets to the back and they've got two guys at the front that they're driving through, it's very hard to stop.
Well, one of the things I find interesting about your journey is, skills are obviously so many different skills in the game of rugby. It's such a multifaceted game. But I've read things about the way that you've helped with lineouts, for instance, with Steve Hansen early on, and things like that you've really enjoyed heading into other areas of the game and pointing out things that you've seen that maybe other people wouldn't see.
Yeah, I think when I first started and I was a full-time skills coach, and you come back from training, what do you do between the training session and the next training session? You know, that was like coaches. If you're the forwards coach, you've got all the footage to look at. You've got maybe 14 or 15 players, or maybe 17 or 18 players you're looking at to try and help. And if you're the backs coach, you're doing that. And if you're the defence coach, you're looking at things. If you're the skills coach, what is it that you do? You know, so the key for me wasn't necessarily looking at a little bit of training, but the big key for me in my first few years was understanding how to teach skills better. So I was fortunate enough to be able to spend a lot of time each week researching on how the body moves, how to make players more explosive, how to move the ball quicker, how to be more dominant in a tackle contest, how to use your body, how to use your joints. And so in my first 3 or 4 years, I mean, I've got a garage full of research on how the body works. And so when it came to the game, if it was a jumping or it was lifting or it was throwing, my understanding of how the body should work, and, you know, through probably the two components, without getting into it too heavily, was basically force and torque. Not the talk we're doing now or the talk I'm good at, but the torque, Torque. So the force and torque of the joints and muscles working together. And it doesn't matter what skill is, that's got to be a combination, whether it's lifting, throwing, passing, tackling. Any of the skill sets rely on your ability to combine force and torque. And so my first few years were spent like that. So if it came to a throw or a line-out throw or a pass, how can you best use your body to be accurate? And in a line-out throw, and Jip knows we spent many times over it, is you got to be efficient in the movement, because you can't dummy throw. So once you start your throw, the line-out starts. So if you've got opposition players targeting your throwing action, if you're not efficient with that action, they're going to pick you off, you know. So how do we use that? And that's the thing for me, whether it doesn't matter what the skill was. So yeah, when we sort of came into the line out, it was like, how can we lift faster? How can we lift better? How can we lift stronger? And what we found was the best way was to get your lifting done after the jumper's jumped. So let the jumper jump and then get the lifting done. And that becomes a really fast, explosive movement. Those types of things, I think when I started, I was fortunate enough to be able to spend a lot of time on myself as a coach versus on my team. Like if I was a forwards coach, I'd have to spend so much time on my team. But as a skills coach, I was able to spend time on myself and make myself better. So, I didn't waste much time in that area in those first few years.
To give you an example of something that Mick taught me early in my super career was, and the way he does it is he asks you a question, he knows the answer, but he asks you the question so you get there yourself. And I'd have the ball up, ready to throw, and line out walks in, goes for the tempo. And if the tempo was called off, I'd put the ball back down, and he'd go, what are you saying to the defence? And what he's trying to say is, if you put the ball back, you can't throw from there. So we started holding medicine balls and heavy balls above our head, because the reason why we all went down is because it was uncomfortable. Yep. We hadn't built the muscles to hold there for 15, 20 seconds and still be able to produce the torque. Yep. And that speed of the throw. And that was a massive adjustment for myself. I think Tom McCartney as well, even Kevy at times. It was, but it's that detail that he'd noticed that if he was an opposition lock and that ball's down, they can just relax and know the ball's not coming in. And it was a big shift from our line out going from about 65, 70% to up towards that 90.
I suppose that Nick Gill, the All Blacks strength and conditioning coach, loved you coming in with biomechanical questions about how he could maybe help you get the people to the point you needed them to in those skills.
Yeah, and I think you bring up Gilly, it's awesome because sometimes you meet coaches in that area that aren't interested in that. They just got their strength and conditioning and they live in their silo, whereas Gilly, and that's why Gilly's been successful for as long as he has, he was also about how do I make this player a better rugby player. So, he and I would have really good conversations around what can we do in the gym to help players, with better leg drive through contact. So we would do a lot of functional stuff in the gym. So they might come off a box squat and do a front foot leg drive on a sled. in the gym, so that they're actually saying, well, I'm squatting, so this is the squat action which is making me stronger, but why am I doing that for rugby? So why am I doing that for rugby? So when I get in this position, I can push with the glutes through the contact. And so when you work with guys like Gilly, it's a blessing, because they're interested in your conversation, and they're not just interested in it to paper over it. They're actually interested in it to help the players get better.
Have you seen that go down the line to NPC and lower levels, where players are doing these kind of similar things off the back of the initial work done by people like Mick and Nick?
Yeah, I think there's a big expectation for that sort of knowledge, because you can't have, that coaches are also developing at that level. So it's a real onus on those senior players that come from, that don't make the All Blacks, to go back down and drive those standards, but also teach, act as assistant coaches as much as anything in that NPC grade.
And so the hope is that by now, Mick, after 20 years, this is a commonplace in rugby culture.
Yeah, I think it is. I think what happens, though, is if you're not careful and you don't keep at it, what creeps in is which I'm finding a lot now, is the what we're doing. So what ends up happening is, what are we going to do here off this play? We're going to go in here and play out the back, and we're going to go around the corner, and we're going to come back here, and that's what we're doing. And I think if we're not careful and we don't have a focus on how, and we end up back where we were a long time ago, where we're just focusing on the what, we're going to lose that ability to execute under pressure, and our skills will drop off. Because, as I said right at the start, if you're Dustin Johnson or you're any of these golfers, they don't just play golf. They're the best golfers in the world. They don't just go and play 10 tournaments a year. They're out there, even after a day's round of golf, they're out on the practice fairway working on maybe their downswing, or maybe their follow through, or maybe their foot positioning, or their upper body positioning. They're always working to get better. And I think that's the thing that we've got to keep in rugby, that we're always looking at how we do things, not just what we're doing.
One thing I really want to ask you about, what the reaction in the squad's been like to this news that Fiji could be playing the All Blacks next year and could be involved in what would be a Southern Hemisphere Six Nations in the future. It must be a pretty happy place reading that.
Yeah, look, I think, we're with our boys, anything that we can do to help promote the game in Fiji is awesome. And we understand our role is in Super Rugby, and we can show a pathway through to the national team. And if we perform well, we give opportunity for people to look in and go, you know what, maybe there are things happening over there that we can get involved in. Or, maybe they look and say, well, they look at our crowds and how our crowds support the game. You'd be mad not to bring a test match there and try and, make the most of that sort of passion. So, we understand the role we play in developing the game and showcasing the game to a professional environment. And our boys are really excited by any growth that means for the team, but also for them personally.
I'd be suggesting it's an afternoon kickoff, black jersey in that heat.
2:30, La Toka, it'd be great. Yep. Probably around about the 18th or 19th of July, it'd be great.
Can you describe the heat though? Like, you look at it from here and, you can see the crowd, they've got umbrellas out just trying to get some shade. Like, it must be so hot at the moment.
Yeah, look, at the moment it's not as bad as it could be, in a couple of months' time, but it's interesting. We went two weeks on the road, and admittedly it was Dunedin, and I'm nothing against Dunedin, it's just further south than most places we travel to. But when we came back from Dunedin, we left Dunedin in tracksuit pants and tracksuit tops, and we got off the plane at Nandi, and the heat just hits you, and you'd only been away for 2 weeks, and it's like, oh, welcome back home.
Yeah.
So, I think the teams that travel in, that's the experience they have. And, we do get used to it, no question. We get used to running and playing and training in it, but it is an advantage of ours, no question. And I guess as teams travel over and get more used to it, they'll get used to it as well.
Who wins the World Cup, Mick?
Straight off the bat. Look, I really like, I know the ABs have had a lot of issues, and I know I'm very biased, but I just think they can bring a game that can upset the way the game's being played at the moment. I think there's a lot of teams up north. France are doing a hell of a lot of good stuff. Ireland are attritionally strong. They get across the game line. They don't give you many chances to turn over the ball and play that loose game against them. They're really well structured. But I think the ABs, they can combine both those, but they do need their forwards functioning in a really physical game.
Before we let you go, Mick, I had one question from a viewer wanting to know, if you think about all the forwards and the backs that you've coached, which 3 forwards do you think would make good backs, and which 3 backs have got the skills to make good forwards?
Okay. Well, I think if I look back and say what forwards have I coached that have ended up in the backs, I remember Victor Vito finished up on the wing in a World Cup game, and he didn't look out of place there at all. So, I think of all the players I've coached, he's done it. I mean, there's probably others. You look at guys now like Aotearoa and these guys. You could probably slip them out somewhere out wide, and they'd hold their own. I think there's a Wallaby guy, Radiki Samo. He didn't do a bad job either when he went out there. And I think, any one of our back row could go and play on the wing at the moment. So we're just teaching them how to be back rowers, but they could do that. Backs to forwards, it's pretty hard to go past the bus. I wouldn't mind seeing him picking the ball up at the back of a scrum. His brother does a pretty good job, but I think it'd be good to see him. Geordie Barrett, I think, could be a good number 6. I wouldn't mind, he runs hard, he goes hard, he's, could be a good kicking 6. Reminds me similar of a guy I coached at Edinburgh who cross-coded to Aussie rules, Mike Pike. He was a fullback winger at Canada Rugby, played at Edinburgh, ended up playing over 100 games with the Swans and won a premiership with them. And I reckon, of the players, Samu Karevi could go to 7. He could hold his own over the ball and pretty physical sort of guy. So, but when you look back over my time, if I had time, I could probably sit down and rattle off a team of backs that could play forwards and a team of forwards that could play backs.
We'd hold you to that if we had another 15 minutes. Maybe we'll let you go to your coaching.
Yeah, awesome.
Wow. Geez, an incredible insight from Mick Byrne. He's a guy who obviously made a very big change to world rugby, and one that people probably don't really know enough about.
Yeah, and just picks up things others don't. Like, he's constantly challenging himself to think outside that square and I suppose be ahead of the game, something that Wayne Smith's known a lot for, but he's of the similar vein. And the amount of work he puts in on watching footage, he just taps through it with his little space bar on and off to make sure he gets the way he articulates things precise. And I think it's his ability to teach is pretty special. And the way he teaches is through drawing the answer out of you, which then it sort of feels like it's your, sort of idea. So then you run with it a lot smoothly. Well, I certainly found that way, and the teammates around us did.
You feel like you have a lot of clarity after he talks.
Yeah, he doesn't complicate things.
Yeah.
Because he does his work and gets it clear in his own head and then delivers it really smoothly. But even that question just off the bat around forwards he doesn't take long to come up with a few,
Nice question there from C-Ins off YouTube, just to mix it up for us. The top 3 backs would be in the forwards and top 3 forwards that could be in the backs. Keep sending your questions through to us week on week, either in the YouTube comments section or at Aotearoa Rugby Pod at sky.co.nz, or in our submission feed, you can send us a video. We don't, because we had Mick on, had time to get through a number of the questions, but we will get onto them next week, including an interesting question about the benefits of the box kick that I'm sure that Bryn would like to chat when he gets back on board. So we will get to your questions over time, but we might not be able to do them all week on week on week. We did have some feedback to last week's big question about the Mount Rushmore of power wingers. The feedback was, what about Portia Woodman? And
it's fair, and I suppose if you look at it from a Super Rugby sense, with I suppose the Manawa going on to win that first title and the impact she had in the final, she was a big point of difference for them to get over the top of the Blues.
And seeing her against England in the Rugby World Cup final, even though she wasn't there all game when she was there, boy, just power.
And I
pace.
suppose the longevity of it, she's done it for so long at sevens. Anytime she stepped into 15s, she's been strong. So she's definitely worthy of being in the top 4.
Yeah, quite a superb player. Now let's get on to the tipping now. Go to superrugby.tipping. You can get involved in the Aotearoa Rugby Pod League and make sure you come on board, because if you win that league, you get to come on with us. I suppose it would be great if they could come in person, but it might be online. The winner will get that. Currently, Chieftains is tied with Limbs jerseys at the top. Jippy, you're doing pretty well. 6.
Oh, mate, I had a rough weekend.
Okay.
Jeez.
Not far off the pace.
Blues hit me hard, and I suppose the Reds upset as well.
You do. As long as you choose to pick the Blues in Christchurch, you're going to be a 50-50.
Yeah. Well, I always say when it comes to the Blues, I am always going to tip with my heart.
Yeah. Well, let's have a look for this weekend. The first game, Moana Pacifica versus the Crusaders. That's at Mount Spartan.
Crusaders.
Reds against the Blues. Interesting, considering how they played against the Chiefs.
Yeah, I think I saw enough ticker in the Blues. Like, once that card happened, it was always going to be difficult. But I think, Brisbane is a tough place to play. Like, it isn't easy. We haven't had a lot of success over the years there, but after last week's loss, I think they'll be better for it.
Highlanders, Rebels.
I'm going to go Highlanders.
They were in it for a lot of that game.
Yeah.
I mean, they were ahead with 20 minutes to go, weren't they, before losing to the Brumbies?
I mean, that was an impressive coming home with a wet sail, the old Brumbies. But away from home, Canberra's a tough place. To be in the fight there is in the position they're in as well. So I think at home, under the roof, the Rebels probably just let that one go, and they struggle up front where the Highlanders started to get some good ascendancy against the Brumbies, so they need to use that driving maul in their scrum to, I suppose, pull the Rebels apart.
Now, I'm imagining that the Chiefs are going to pull back a few of their big name players into this game against the Hurricanes, because if they don't, the Hurricanes could turn this competition on its head. Massively,
and I tell you who would love it the most would be the Brumbies. So Chiefs at home, you have to think they're probably going as favourites, and I'll be picking them, but it'll be a slim margin. The ruthless nature of probably guys getting opportunity. You think about Harry Godfrey and his future now after the way he performed on the weekend. It gives them confidence to go to Hamilton and think they can get the job done.
Tars Drua.
I think, like Mick mentioned, the travel, it's not going to be as hard because I've come from Perth. But one thing concerns me is the Tars need to keep it in their forwards. They were strong at line-out. Every time they got a line-out turnover, they scored on the weekend, and they were strong in the maul when they had the ball. So I think it might be a step too far up front.
And the Brumbies are away at the Force, considering what you saw from the Force against the Drua. Any chance the Brumbies get pipped?
No, I think the Brumbies won't be happy with their performance. Their standards. If everyone played like Rob Valentini and Pete Samu, they would be. So I think they need a little bit more this weekend, and they'll have a bit of edge about them.
Well, we're certainly getting close. 3 weeks to go. A lot of these games are going to be making big differences. A lot of the teams in the top 5 or 6 playing each other over those last few rounds, we could see some changes.
Well, you look at last season, and it was probably the excitement was around that 7-8, but I think there's a little bit of excitement there. But man, up the top end, who finishes 5th and 4th is massive, because it makes it a tough ask when it's probably going to be a derby game.
There are 2 solid talking points, aren't there? And I think that's the point of having a top 8, is that you can create that next talking point instead of it just being a semi-final talking point.
And it's not forced. I feel like everyone's riding behind it. You're not having to coax people talking about it, in the streets or even on social media. So it's a good time for Super Rugby to, I suppose, hit that next level now. And you look at the Chiefs game against the Crusaders and the Crusaders Blues. That's just entertaining. Not a lot of points scored, but it is entertaining from way to go.
Yeah, we are getting into the big part of the season. Thank you again, Jipper, for coming on board.
Mate.
And please keep up with us with the Super Rugby action. You can also get All Blacks tickets now. They're out on sale for the All Blacks versus South Africa at Mount Smart on July 15 and Australia in Dunedin on August 5. Those tickets are for sale as of today. which is Tuesday. If you're watching it tomorrow, it was yesterday. But thank you very much for joining us once again on the Aotearoa Rugby Pod. Send us an email on aotearoarugbypod@sky.co.nz. Comment in the YouTube comments section. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to see you again next week. Mā te wā.